right, I think we're about ready to get started. Welcome everyone to our July Lunchtime Learning session with Dr. Juanita Cleaver Simmons. If you could, please mute yourself out of respect for the speaker. This is being recorded and will be made available on stopRED.org, along with any past sessions. So if there's one that you missed, you are certainly welcome to check it out online. Please take the 2-minute survey at the end of the session. I will put that link in the chat box at the end. I also want to say funds are made available for this project through the Missouri Department of Public Safety and the Missouri Juvenile Justice Advisory Group from funding provided by the U.S. Department of Justice, Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. And I will go ahead and turn it over to our one and only Dr. Juanita Cleaver Simmons, our RED consultant.
Good afternoon to everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. Today, our discussion is going to be very informal, and I'm going to rely upon you to participate. This is National Minority Mental Health Month, and I thought under our current theme of civility in America, that mental health for women and minorities could be an excellent connection. So today we're going to talk about what's going on, the impacts of incivility in public sphere, and of course, the open conversations about civility in public organizations. As you all know, we are in the middle of what they're calling a culture war in America. And so incivility has increased. And I'm going to show you some recent studies on at least 1,500 people who have responded to a national study on civility and how they're feeling that civility is impacting the American climate. So the goals for today, number one, to understand civility and the impact that uncivil behavior has on personal and professional relationships, and then to understand how incivility serves as a determinant and a trigger of mental health, especially for minorities and socially isolated people. And I stress socially isolated people because as we look at civility in the workplace, we've got to be mindful of how certain behaviors can actually promote isolation for certain individuals who might be different. The third goal is to recognize forms of incivility. And I said some forms of incivility. I think that we're going to work with probably 4 of them, and then to consider ways to reduce it. So we want to talk about that. I want to first open up the understanding about interactive audience participation. With interactive audience participation, I ask that if it's possible, show your face so that, and I'm a call and response person. I read faces and the energy from people. And so it motivates me, but it also propels the discussion and opens it up for views from participants by seeing you and being able to express. Now, I know it's not always possible because you're at work, calls come in, people knock on the door, some of you are eating and listening. We understand that, but as much as possible, do show your face. Also, feel free to share your thoughts. You can either raise your hand physically or use that emoji, or you can use the chat box, or you can just, when there's a space, just speak out. This is informal. And then we ask that you agree or disagree respectfully, because everybody has a view. I wanted to start out with this quote, which has been one that's been with me for, I know, 40 years. And the quote is, "Knowledge is all that stands between civilization and the vast wasteland of ignorance." Knowledge is all that stands between civilization and that vast wasteland of ignorance. Most of us may not think about civility and incivility as a social determinant of health, and they call that SDOH. The SDOH, social determinant of health. So a lot of times we don't look at civility and incivility as the impact that it has on one's health. I started studying civilizations. I've got an interest in non-Western literature. So I've collected a lot of information down through the years on various cultures, being a humanities major, in grad. I found that there were about 6 ancient civilizations that went into decline. And one, surprisingly, was the original civilization that existed in a portion of Missouri with a Native American group that spread all the way through Illinois and to some of the borders of Mississippi. And I wanted to know, how did each of these civilizations, including that one, that was thousands of years before we had what we call St. Louis area and Missouri, I wanted to know how those civilizations went into decline. And when I studied each of those 6 ancient civilizations, what they had in common was, number one, environmental factors that caused the decline. And either the people had to move away and integrate with other groups, or they died out from farming, vegetation that declined because of the environment. But another major thing was cultural civil disputes, where people disputed and ran each other off behind the differences in their beliefs and their cultures. And it reminded me of the fact that we're in a culture war right now, and the threat of the decline of civilization. They noted that in each time a civilization declined, it first started with blocking the knowledge of one culture to control the dominant culture's story, ridding it of its narrative, demeaning the individuals who were of the other lesser dominant group, demeaning and violating, setting up rules to block them out, to take away their democratic part, even if they were the ones who owned the land when invaders came in. So I think it's important for us to understand how we impact other people, workplace relations, and how we relate to the people we serve in the midst of this culture war. And so I just want to open up the floor. Whenever you see this mic, this means please say something. Please feel free to talk. So I want to open that up. My question is, what do you do to center yourself in the positive every day? What do you do that centers you in the positive mode every day? Joyce, I see you.
I garden or spend some type of time outside in my memory garden and try to focus on positive energies before I ever leave the farm.
Great. So the farm is your environment, and that should be soothing within itself to some degree, right?
Oh, yes, ma'am.
Thank you for sharing that. Michelle, do you mind? What do you do to center yourself in the positive every day?
And is that Michelle Henry you're referring to?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, Michelle Henry.
I try to think about all the reasons I should be, I am blessed, and that I'm privileged to have work, to have health, to have family and friends. And I try to start the day with that as the number one priority to just consider and reflect on.
Great, great. Thank you for sharing that. Mariah, do you have a particular thing that you use to center yourself daily?
So I do positive affirmations, and
Mm.
I also use the word I get to instead of I have to. So it kind of changes my mindset into that positive atmosphere.
That's a good one too. I'll have to practice that. Today I get to do blah, blah, blah. Thank you for sharing that. Elizabeth.
I'm relatively religious. So I have morning prayers that I do, and morning meditations, as well as thoughts and things throughout the day to kind of help me stay grounded.
All righty. That inspiration does assist the average person. Now, can you imagine, is there anybody else who'd like to share? Did I get all of the hands and chats?
Did you see everything in the chat?
I haven't gone into the chat. Let's see. In the chat, I guess they're talking about my little man moving around.
Yeah. We have going for a walk.
Someone said, you say go for a walk. Alex says morning meditations. Bethany says gardening. Brenda says go for a walk in the woods and prayer. Riley says come up with a game plan for the day before I leave the house. Mary says do a good deed daily. Brandy says I make my bed every day. Once my first task of the day is complete, I am mentally prepared to help others. I try to prioritize small acts of kindness for myself, which make me more mindful of the things that may be missed by others. Great. It's good to know that you, as professionals with the challenging work you do, are aware of the importance of centering yourself daily. I do a morning prayer, and I was on a prayer line for many, many years up until the last year when I started having a lot of challenges with scheduling a national women's prayer line. And that helped me to center myself from 5 a.m. in the morning. But in the place of that, I play music in the mornings after I do my brief meditation. And I usually start the day with Let the Church Say Amen with Andre Crouch. It's something about that song that brings me to the realization that you can only control so much. And those things that you see before you that you cannot control, just say amen to it and try to keep going after you've done your best. And so that's my piece. And when I'm in heavy traffic, I'm playing that a lot. And then, of course, my evening, I'm playing jazz. I love my jazz. Thanks for sharing that. I think that the more individuals begin to look at the impact that external factors will have on them and the importance of controlling that themselves, it will reduce this behavior of incivility. Civility is an interesting thing because I started focusing on civility when I started seeing many Americans taking DEI as a negative thing. I always believe that the highest form of humanity is doing that which is about the survival of all mankind, not just about your gender or your race or your sexual orientation. That it's important to know that when it's all over, the main thing, if you study the decline of civilizations, the main thing to understand is it's about the survival of this human species. What do we do? And so I found this definition after looking at several on civility. I found this one that was created in 2013 at Indiana University, and they simply say it's polite, reasonable, and respectful behavior. Yet they say workplace incivility is, quote, low intensity deviant behavior with ambiguous intent to harm the target in violation of workplace norms for mutual respect and courtesy. So there is a general civility about reasonable, polite, respectful behavior. And then there is a workplace civility and incivility that talks about certain behaviors that may have some political intent behind it. So What is civility? These are terms that people have used to describe what civility are: respect, decency, lending a hand, awareness. And the word awareness comes to mind to me because a lot of times when people are showing acts of incivility, they are not aware of the full historical perspectives that may be associated with individuals as they offend them. Certain words that trigger. Self-control is one, that you can't respond to everything and think you're going to remain sane and healthy. Sincerity, the sincerity, just being sincere. When I ask, how are you doing? I'm not like, how you doing? I truly want to know, how are you? And if I don't really want to know how are you, then I'll say something else, good morning. But it's basic good citizenship. Compassion is what civility is. Understanding the shoes that another person might be in. We look at race a lot, and that's because this is about racial and ethnic disparities. We look at gender, we look at LGBTQIA. Often in our society, because we are so leaning toward those obviously oppressed groups, women, LGBTQIA, transgender populations, ethnic minorities, we actually sometimes forget about the socioeconomic levels of people. And we may not have the compassion for them and say, well, they're not in this category, they ought to be doing okay. But we forget that people suffer. My husband and I were having a discussion, we're here in Dallas right now, about how many homeless people we are seeing on the streets. And as we drove through the town, taking care of business and all, going back and forth to our appointments, we noticed that there were as many non-minority, ethnic minority people who are homeless and living and sleeping on the street as there are people who might be BIPOC population, people who may be of color. And so that is another area that we have to be aware and more compassionate about, that's beyond the part of race. As you have comments, please raise your hands, and if you, anytime you want to share, feel free to do so. If I'm not seeing you because of my slides, just speak out. I welcome that. There are basically 3 forms, and I see that the mic is off here with Mariah. Oh, she's got it on now. Okay. They're basically 3 areas that civility will produce: interpersonal relationships, personal dignity, and personhood. I stress the thing of personhood. And often, if you've been to some of my training, I talk about Ubuntu, which is the concept of a person is not a person without other people. We give people personhood. And when we isolate and ignore people, we void them of and rob them of personhood. And the studies are showing that when you look at the cases of people who have done mass shootings, each time one of the common threads is isolation. Isolation. And people who have been bullied repeatedly. And so we've got to be aware of this importance of individual human rights, the acknowledgement of that. And that includes mental and physical health of individuals, regardless of their social, political, racial, whatever. That interpersonal relationship is a very important one, affirming positive interpersonal relationships in our community without exclusion and deficit theorizing. Deficit theorizing is when we take a theory in the deficit against people because of their race or gender, socioeconomic thing, or their sexual orientation. But this is important that we look at this in our professions, particularly working with youth and those working in the courts, in our departments and divisions, with our clients. It's important that we are aware of this so that we are not taking the deficit theory against them. Now, another term for deficit theory is racism. And it shows itself in acts of prejudice, which those are also acts of incivility. And then just the personal dignity, preserving the personal dignity of every individual, every human being. And that's not asking for a lot. This is another area that I'd like for you to participate in and discuss. And in order for me to show the full screen, I'm just going to need you all to just call it out. True or false? Just tell me when you see the statement, do you think it's true or false? Civility means not openly disagreeing with someone in a meeting. Is that what civility is?
False.
False. All right, elaborate a little bit on that.
This is Michelle Henry, and for me, disagreeing simply means I see things different. I'm not in line with your thoughts or reasoning. It does not mean I'm not civil. The delivery can, be along the lines of, am I civil or not? But not the disagreement.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. Delivery has so much to do with it. Now, that delivery thing can be tricky because if certain cultures in the delivery, sometimes depending on what the nature of the disagreement is, sometimes they can be a little bit more passionate. And that in our society signals violence. And so we've got to kind of know how to detect that with that delivery. Anyone else before we go to the second one? Okay, civility is a cultural issue, not a personal one. What do you think? Do you think civility is cultural and not personal? Is that true or false?
False.
Okay, we'll get back into that. Does anybody think it's true? Why do you think it's false?
Because I think everybody has the right to civility. Like, it is personal. Like, I don't think it has to do with culture in general. I think that it has to do with individuals as a person, and everybody deserves civility.
That's an excellent response because, and this is always a controversial one when we're doing civility training. And so I'm going to show you what the expected response is. And your response, though, is one that typically comes up. Thank you for sharing that. The next one is civility means you always are supposed to smile and be polite.
False.
False. Anybody have anything to tag into that part about the smiling thing and being polite? Okay.
I'll say, Dr. Simmons, I'll say, I think you should always be polite, but that doesn't always come with a smile.
Thank you, Nikisha.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, that smiling thing, I see people walking in the store in Walmart, and you walk upon them and you don't even know them, and they're just smiling, but just like, and I always have to tug myself because I'm like, oh, okay, let me smile back. Why are you smiling? Is there, so that's an optional type thing, and we'll look at how they respond to this nationally. The next one, civility imposes restrictions on our everyday behavior. Is that true or false?
False.
Okay. You don't think that there are some restrictions that come along with everyday behavior to be civil? Okay, let's think about that.
Dr. Simmons, I think a better word might be discipline.
How would you say it? Let me hear
it. Civility requires discipline in our everyday behavior.
Okay, all righty. That's a good one. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think it's true.
Okay.
I say it's true that there are restrictions because the expectation that you and I, we're gonna self-regulate.
Mhm.
There's gonna be a certain way that we are going to, I guess, restrict how we respond, how we behave, how we act in the name of being civil. So
Mhm.
it does restrict us. That's how we, so self-regulation, not, it's a restriction. That's it.
Mhm. Thank you for sharing that, Michelle. Our last one is civility means adhering to a standard set of rules or etiquette.
True.
So that's true for me just because it goes along with the first one that talks about expectations or restrictions. That's what
Mhm.
standards, rules of ethics, and rules of etiquette is about.
Mhm. Thank you for sharing that, Nakia. All right, let's see what the national response agreed on. Civility means not openly disagreeing with someone in a meeting. They said that's false. Civility is a cultural issue, not a personal one. And they say that that is actually true. And there's an argument. The response that we receive from the audience is the often response that is given. And so I think that this one is almost circumstantial. Civility means you always are supposed to smile and be polite. That's false. Sometimes there's a cultural connection with the smiling faces, you know. But anyway, civility imposes restrictions on our everyday behavior. That's true, because you do have to often accommodate your anger, um, the feelings that you have, and all of that in order not to offend and to intimidate. And the last one, civility means adhering to a standard set of rules. That's false. It's contextual, is what they say. Okay, moving on, unless you have some comments. Any thoughts or comments that I've missed out on? So why do we even need to talk about incivility? The small acts of incivility actually generate more small acts, and it becomes damaging to a person's health and to the health of an organization. There are certain people in the community who say, I don't want to go down to the welfare office, or I don't want to go down and talk to these people in the juvenile office. I'm just going to cut it out. I'm tired of the way they talk and they treat you, or blah, blah, blah. So that stems from some act of incivility that creates that. And sometimes it's traditional from certain communities because of historical experiences that they've had that were acts that were uncivil. But we have to understand that as public servants. Over time, though, incivility can become the norm and may eventually lead to bullying, harassment, and violence. And so we have to be careful of what happens with that. And so now here's a discussion. I just want to ask you all if you are comfortable with this. Has incivility become normed in America to you? And if you have recently experienced some act of incivility, whether it's personally, professionally, at the church, or wherever, anybody have experienced any of this? Julie, is incivility now norms in our society? And have you had any recent experiences with acts of incivility?
There we go. I was trying to unmute myself. Yes, I actually have. And I've been, of course, as you say, there's 10,000 things that we're doing at one time. So I did actually from another professional. This is a personal story. I was told I was irrelevant and I probably should not be working with African-American youth and families because I was white. So that really hit me really hard because I mean, it's part of my job to work with everybody. And it's very difficult for me even now because I had someone who was a professional in another organization tell me basically again that I was irrelevant. And so it still is I'm still working. This was about, a month ago or so. And it really made me pause to think, am I irrelevant? Because this is another professional telling me I'm irrelevant. So should I be doing this job? Should I be working with kids and families? And, you know, there was some self-doubt, and you talk about the repercussions of incivility. And like I said, even from other professionals, it hits hard.
Yeah.
And it makes people have a lot of doubt of themselves, of what they're doing, what they want to do, advocating for kids. I mean, I know I'm I'm kind of that very passionate person, that all in person, especially when it comes to education for kids. And, you know, and so am I going to keep doing my job? I am, but unfortunately, and that's a self narrative, it's always in the back of my mind now,
Yeah.
because someone said that.
Mhm. I'm sorry that that happened to you, and anyone who has had training from me, you know, I have a response for that from prior experiences that I have had. And so I also can understand how that can be taken as an offense. Nakia, are you coming on? Do I hear you? I see you with your mic off. Miss Dodd, I don't hear you.
Okay. I was just agreeing with you that yes, that is it's when you look at it through a DEIB lens, it's really ridiculous that we have gotten to a place in our society where it feels like it's in civil just nationwide. I mean, I'm not just saying just even in the workplace, and that it does have that trickle down effect where when our leaders conduct themselves in civil manners, then it feels like we're normalizing rudeness, we're normalizing intolerance, we're normalizing things that when I was younger, I never thought would ever be something that would be a standard behavior. We had an expectation of each other, if nothing else, you know, because you know, one of the things that's a Midwest culture is that we tend to be polite. We look, we wave, we acknowledge each other. We say, I see you when we walk in the street. You know, we're not rude. And now it's like when your leaders are rude, you're seeing it on the news. There's no even standards in that, you know. So yeah, I'm sorry, I'm on a whole rant. I apologize. But yes, I believe it's very in simple. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Ms. Dodd. And I am going to show you in connection with your statement about political leaders and their influence on civility and incivility. I'm going to show you some of the national stats on that. Anyone else care to share? Just speak out in case I don't see you. This part that Julie mentioned about the part of serving if you are not of the race of your clients, that comes from an old system, and it has two sides to it. As a former administrator, as I hired individuals, and my populations, my student populations were always ethnic minorities. But as I hired people, I gave more priority, number one, to how do you feel about kids and this job that I'm expecting you to do? And then, can you identify, can you associate with them? Because I had certain upper class people of color who had not had urban experiences with our children, and that showed up. But then I had some who were not of color, who had come from a different background, who had lived in similar circumstances as my kids. They could identify with them, and they knew how to go across that track. And I can name some of them. So I saw this down through the years to the point that it became more important to me to get people who cared about my kids and who understood them. more so than anything else. Yeah, I would love for them to look like them because I wanted my kids to have actual role models. It's a good thing if you do look like them or whatever. But my priority is, do you care about my babies? And that's where I gave respect. And so I think that we've got to look at all situations. Any other comments before we move on? And thank you for sharing that, Julie. It's important that we have these types of discussions. They are uncomfortable discussions. Ms. Nakia talked about leadership in America, and this is the last national survey that KRC Research did. They do them every so many years. But first, the question was, problem with civility in America today? Is there truly a problem? And you could see that the blue is people who say it's not a problem, the light blue. The dark blue is people saying it's a minor problem. The red is where people say, yeah, it's a major problem. So yeah, it's not something, and you can pull up this data. It's called Civility in America 7, the state of civility. There's a whole booklet that you can get on the line on the internet and download. Then they asked, incivility in America has risen to crisis level. Has it come to a level of crisis? 75% of the people say, yeah, it's at a crisis level. The U.S. is losing stature as a civil nature. People said, yeah. 74% of these thousands of people said, yeah, we're losing our stature. As Ms. Dodd was saying, that it used to be, it was a common courtesy type expectation. And you might notice it and think others haven't noticed it, but nationally, people have said, yeah, it's a problem. So in a summary of some of the data, civility in America by numbers, 84% have personally experienced incivility. And I asked, have you had any acts of it? And almost every one of you, if you thought back, you have had it, and some today and some in the past week, and some every day all of your life. 59% quit paying attention to politics because of incivility. They stopped looking at certain news things. I have certain friends who I have to tell them what's on the headline because they couldn't take it any longer. And so that's 59% stop paying attention to politics because of incivility. 53% stop buying from a company because of uncivil representatives. You are representatives of your organizations. Do you realize that you have the power to stop people from being comfortable or supporting your organization? I've worked in organizations where I didn't agree with everything they did, but it wasn't the public's business until we could straighten it out. And I always spoke openly about injustices and acts of incivility in the workplace. But I didn't jump in front of clients or take it out on clients or my students. She's in a bad mood because they didn't give her grant. But we, as the study shows, actually influence how the public sees our organizations, and we have to be careful of that. 34% have experienced incivility at work. 25% cyberbullying or incivility online, nearly 3 times since 2011, and it's even higher now. We know of teens who have committed suicide because of cyberbullying. And we know that many of the lone killers who have done mass shootings, when you go back and look at their cyber interaction, their internet conversation, a lot of it was the communication that took place. 20% of the parents have transferred their children to different schools because of incivility. And this is what has increased many of the charter schools, and that has become almost like a circular thing. Then they go to the charter school in some cases, and they go back to the public school. And a lot of people are just running around in circles trying to find an education for their kids where they feel that children will be treated civilly. Several of the cases of people who contact me for support are people who have children who are of mixed race. And you'll be surprised how often those children are treated in their school environments. Incivility perceptions, 9 to 10 say incivility leads to intimidation and threats. 89% say that. Harassment, 89%, discrimination, 88, violence, 88, and cyberbullying. So all of this is posted and you can receive it, but I put a star down at the 63% because this directly impacts you. 63% believe that people are more civil at work than outside of work. 59 say that incivility in politics deters people from going to public service. So we need to be aware of our importance to this. Lastly, on these particular stats, going back to what I think Ms. Dodd was saying, presidential civility is one that they've done separate studies on. Of Americans surveyed, 97% believe that it is important for the U.S. president to be civil. Now, this is a contradiction to what we're seeing because it's almost like the more uncivil a political official acts, the more popular and the more macho strength. Let's vote for him. Let's get behind him. And so we have to look at that. 86% agree a president's tone and level of civility impacts the reputation of all of America. And so those things are important. I want to go on because these stats go on and on to look at Americans have experienced incivility high on the road, some cyberbullying, social events, pretty high in shopping and in political events or rallies. So about this thing, why is it important? Those little small acts of incivility start on a lower range. It's like a thermostat. The more they happen, incivility becomes normalized. It becomes okay. And then it rises to a level 3, which brings on bullying, aggression, harassment, and violence. And so you think that when you're hearing these little uncivil comments politically, that, oh, that's just stupid. Oh, that's just the way this person describes it. But there's someone looking at it whose gauge is going up, and it gets to a level of violence and aggression. So we have to be very careful of that. Of the forms of incivility that we see, and we're going to have to go through this quickly, incivility in the workplace is the top one. And how we do it is we ask for input and then we ignore it, interrupt people when they're talking, gossiping, things that are done, giving someone a dirty look, rolling the eyes, sending an email. I've said in business meetings around the table, when I had a colleague to actually turn the back of her chair to me in the circle, to cut me off from the connection of the circle. That's an incivil act. Not returning phone calls, even micro messaging in the emails with heavy print. Now, it's a terrible thing, this thing of incivility in the workplace, because the impact that it has on you, it decreases your work, your capacity. Like Julie was saying, it makes you can't get it out of your head. It makes you doubt certain things. And so it can rob you, if you let it, of your performance in the work. So 60% performance goes down, according to the studies that were done with 800 managers. The job suffers. So workplace bullying is a part of one of the acts of incivility in the workplace. It's an interaction consisting of any combination of harassment, discrimination, social exclusion, public and professional humiliation, criticism, intimidation, psychological, and sometimes physical abuse that occurs repeatedly. And if it gets past a 6-month period, according to Penn State, that's where it could be filed as workplace bullying. There's an organizational pathology that comes under this, and it comes from, it's a little political way that they can do to mob you, exclude you from things everybody else heard about it but you. And that goes back to, I think Kansas City was putting, their DEI committee was adding belongingness as a major part of their training, because this thing of exclusion is the absence of belongingness. And that's a part of organizational pathology. And there are different methods of this mobbing. Another part of incivility that we see is racial and ethnic minorities and women. And if you can see this chart, the highest number of people who said that they suffered incivility that was racially based was 77%. Racially based, that's what Black people said. And then the next highest group, immigrants, and then women. Then the lower income people, homeless people, Muslims, LGBTQIA, all the way into the Jewish population. Now, some would argue that the Jewish population, because of what's happening now in Israel, that probably has increased, and it probably has also increased with Muslims. So we're going to have a discussion coming up in our civility series that we're doing, hearing from the voices of Jewish people and what they have experienced at work, acts of incivility. So this is a part of this racial thing. Anti-woke is a part of racial incivility. This is what you see. Can you all see these statements? This is what's all over the web. It's all right to be white. Diversity means fewer white people. Inclusion means exclusion of white people. Equity means stealing from white people. These are statements that create incivility that can rise to that level of violence. Diversity equals white genocide. Don't forget these racist beliefs. I'm oppressed because of what people did long before me. All of these things add to that. And so we ask, the anti-woke movement is an act of racialized incivility. This is why DEI is becoming demonized. Strategies and the fear of dominance and power, racial and cultural mythology, misguided rhetoric, as I just showed you on the signs, and the impacts that these have on organizations. Defining woke, that's just an adjective that came from African-American vernacular that actually means alert to racial prejudice and discrimination. But now woke is almost being legislated in some states. To be woke is to almost be at risk with your job. And they've wiped out DEI with several college campuses where governors have stopped funding them, where governors have now personally placed trustees who were extremely conservative and against woke on HBCU boards. This is that wake and anti-wake movement, and it is a part of incivility. It's a part of identity politics, social justice, DEIB. So it's against all of this. And we won't have time to hear this videotape here, but also understand that this discrimination, when you look at incivility as a part of racial, gender incivility, it's a historical thing, and it has promoted mental health. When we talk about this being mental health, Minority Mental Health Month, it's promoted this. It's created trauma, generational trauma, epigenetic trauma that's been handed down. And this videotape, and if you want to see it in the future, it's called Traveling While Black, Never Pay with the $20 Bill. This is what people in my generation experienced, just trying to get from one town to the other, not knowing where to stop for gas. You better not have a $20 bill because they don't have to give you your change back. You can't use the bathroom. All of these things, if we're not going to use the term of racism, we'll just simply call it incivility, since that is no longer accepted.
We always leave late at night so that we try to get to North Carolina just after dawn, so that we could drive through most of the place, most of the South in the dark.
And so that's what people experienced, not being able to use the bathroom. And I hope you all will take the time to pull that up. The other form of incivility is a lot of what you see with mental illness in the criminal justice system, where people are detained and incarcerated. The studies show that people who study from mental and psychological disorders are often the ones who are put into isolation in prison, and that escalates it more. This shows that an estimated 4,000 people with serious mental illness are held in solitary confinement. Suicide increases. And so as we look at incarcerating people, even in our detention centers, it is important that we show that human and the personal part of assisting the individuals not to escalate it. more. Access to care for our youth, 70% of the youth in juvenile justice system have a diagnosable mental health condition. 70%. Youth in detention are 10 times more likely to suffer from psychosis than youth in the general community. Veterans, people of color. And so we need to be aware of that. Uncivil actions trigger mental health, even if they might have mild cognitive disabilities. The incivil acts actually trigger and escalate mental health more. And so the treatment at youth detention centers impacts behavior of our youth. And there's an article on that that I ask you all to look at. Just pull up National Minority Mental Health Youth and the NIMHD, and they have so much on this about youth in detention centers. So during the next few years, they were asked, people were asked, is this going to improve? How many of you feel like it will? And people said, 56% said it's going to get worse. And then came January 2016, when you knew that the election and the inauguration and all of that was happening with the former president, it actually increased to 58%. Now, what does that say? You have to decide. Another part of racial and ethnic incivility is this chilly climate. Sometimes it's not direct acts. It's just that little chilliness, which creates a sense of isolation that goes back to that belongingness. It reduces belongingness. It challenges your mental health and physical health. And like Julie saying, you start thinking, is it me? Wait a minute, what am I? Maybe it does something to you, but it also impacts institutions and the community's reputation. So I'm going to go to, and these are some acts of incivility. This will be posted, and it shows some of the causes for it, and the power games, and the paranoia, and the consequences to the workplace and your organization and to individuals, and how it leads to bullying. Recommendations. 1, put policies on workplace behavior and put teeth in them. Specify what constitutes bullying, harassment, have it defined. Deal with the bullying cases. Don't just let it go. Deal with it. Have some, sometimes it may come to a claim. Educational programs for administrators, training such as this about civility so people can recognize it. Prohibit harassing communication between staff, clients, employees, residents. Those jokes, the little stuff, it needs to go. Effective counseling for intervention at all levels. People need to be counseled. Actions to improve civility. In the national study, in closing, they said that social media sites, 58%, they need to eliminate those posts that are negative or fake. 49% say civility training in schools and colleges, start teaching kids about it. All the way down to 20% saying that they need to have a national day of civility. Some companies, workspaces have what they call National Civility Day so that they can do acts of kindness. Some of the other remedies are, of course, starting with yourself, be a part of the solution, say what you mean and mean what you say. Don't avoid authentic communication, as we saw. And then you don't have to just, I'm not going to talk, I'm not going to say, you don't have to avoid it. But as someone shared with us, the delivery of it is important. Take responsibility for what you do. Manage this and do intervention early. Focus on the situation, not the people. Employee commitment to stop bullying. In conclusion, acts of incivility are a type of psychological bullying that predominantly occur in social environments. Professional bullying as acts of incivility will not stop until colleagues and administrators actively say no to those behaviors. So as I close, I want to remind you that further discussion is welcome. We do have a blog, and the blog is on MJJA's website called Making Connections. It's already posted for further discussion on National Minority Health. Last month we did Juneteenth. And we talked about the heavy cost of banning books for Black children. With that, I'm closing, and I'd like to open the floor. We've got a few minutes for questions, comments. What are you thinking?
There's two questions in the chat box, Dr. Simmons. One from Julie. How do older workers fit into this topic?
I think they fit into it the same way. What is it about older workers, Julie, that differs from this?
I just feel like sometimes being a mature individual, there's just like if maybe you don't know, if you're not super like tech savvy or computer literate, and you
Oh.
ask a question maybe,
Mhm.
and it's something maybe you hadn't run across before. I mean, I actually have people come to me for help, but there's sometimes it's just in the whole boomer. Oh, you don't understand the younger generation, and you don't, you're a boomer. I'm not a boomer, but there's just this kind of negativity about more mature workers in the in the workplace right now.
Mhm.
And that also, I
Yeah.
think, can be hurtful to people
Yeah.
because, like you're saying, we all have something to offer. I think everyone has something to offer. And you have to look at the person and not how old they are, or gender, or sexual orientation, or ethnicity. Just look at just be civil.
Yeah.
Just be civil to people. And not everyone has to agree with you, and you don't have to agree with them. But when you're in the workplace, you have to just be kind.
Yeah.
And we all work in public service, right? So we're
Yeah.
kind to our families, and there just should be, in my opinion, there should be an atmosphere of welcome rather than separation, which is what you were just discussing, or we were just discussing, is people feel like they don't belong
Yeah.
and then they leave. And we could
Mm.
be missing some really, really good
Mm.
workers, people who are doing good things for kids and families, or wherever you guys are, chiming in from. And I do think there's discrimination for older workers, as well
Mhm.
as women, as well as African American partners and people. And it's everybody. So we
Yeah.
need to start looking at the character of the person and what they're demonstrating, because
Mhm.
actions speak a whole lot louder than words. And I'll leave it at
Absolutely.
that.
I'm glad that you shared that, and we see what just recently happened to the president about aging and how quickly people zoomed in on that. Um, I think that in our society we have not honored, as many other civilizations honored, the experience of elders. As we just said, with the remedies, the training is important. Many organizations don't do training on civility. They don't have policies on harassment. And our younger generation, they don't even know what you're talking about. They're just outright, they deal with the computer all the time. And that human relation is lacking with a lot of them. And so they would just say, oh, whatever, and move on. And they don't even know that it's offensive sometimes. Thank you for sharing that, Julie. Other comments,
You're
we've
welcome.
got 1 minute.
Alex asked, how would one hold a supervisor manager accountable in this way?
I think, first of all, you go back to the organization's vision. What is the vision of the organization? What do you all say that you are about? And then looking at the policies. Is harassment in there? Do they have intimidation in there? And I think that calls for a discussion that you need to go back to. Sometimes there are subcommittees, such as DEI committees or whatever, and they'll say our focus is going to be on policies for harassment, policies for bullying. Sometimes, though, because we don't evaluate, we don't have the way we treat people as a part of the evaluation, people don't even take it as important. There are no teeth there. And so it needs to be a discussion there. It's a sad thing because it's hard to talk to your boss about how your boss is treating you. And if you go somewhere else, it may get you in trouble. So normally, either you bring someone else in, or you set up a tea, cake, and cookies and have somebody to show a little clip or a film, coffee and donuts. Those DEI committees are excellent. If you have RED in your organization, use red to invite and bring training in. And so it needs to be brought in a safe way where you won't feel threatened. Are there any other questions in there, Liz?
Is there any hope for change when incivility seemingly reigns at the top? That's from Joyce.
I think that there are more people who are civil than not. And I think that the more we voice these things and talk about it, we can bring change. We've got to hold it down. I don't want to shut the door and go in the house and give up. It's an easy thing to do because I don't want to get any older and be angry. I feel a release as I speak on these things, so go out with that. And I think that we ought to talk about it. Those of us who believe in civil behavior, we need to talk about it, get our churches involved. Yeah, there's hope because there's more of us than the other. The others are just speaking louder and more violently. So we've got to get out there. I know our time is up. Were you getting ready to say something, Liz?
Just cut you off.
Go on. Yeah, cut me off, honey.
So no, thank you. That was great. All kinds of positive things in the chat. Excellent presentation. Thank you. Thank you. I thought that was great. We are planning our next session to be, let's see, we're in August 21st, I believe we decided upon. So I'll be getting the announcement out. And also just check the website. I do keep those on there. I think that's it. Take the
evaluation surveys. We always need those to know how we can improve.
Yes, please, please. All right.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks for your participation. You were an excellent group. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Oops.